But really, if we start in the basic functions, sales, marketing, CS, and finance are some of the different backgrounds we've seen.
David, how are you, man?
I'm doing good, Adam. How are you?
I'm awesome. Here we are at another episode of the podcast.
That's right. Episode 3, we're going to be pros pretty soon.
If only they knew how long it took us to get the intro out.
No one will ever know.
Tell no one. Exactly. Well, welcome again to another edition of the RevOps Recruiters podcast. Our mission is to provide you with insights and best practices around finding, hiring, and retaining top revenue operations talent.
That's right. We're your hosts, Adam and David from RevSearch.
That's us. So what are we going to jump into today, David?
Today we're going to talk about pathways to RevOps. So we're going to unpack a few of the things around, what we see in profiles and what type of candidates end up in revenue operations and where do they come from.
Yeah, I love this. So if you're a hiring manager and you're thinking, hey, what should I be looking for in a candidate profile? I think this will be helpful to you, as well as if you're a candidate thinking, hey, I'd really like to get into this as my next step in my career, but I'm not sure if what I've done this far has set me up well for where I want to go.
That's right.
I think this will be a great topic.
Yeah.
So as we think about these pathways or this pathway to RevOps, what are some of those non-ops roles that you've seen transition well into RevOps?
Yeah. So looking at revenue operations, it's a very cross-functional focused role, right? We're looking at business end to end. So naturally, we see a lot of the types of candidates that come into this function out of all the different functions.
Yeah.
So there's different entry points. We see it across sales, across marketing, across customer success, finance, sometimes in a more technical systems role or one step ahead, an analyst role.
Sure.
But really, if we start in the basic functions, sales, marketing, CS, and finance are some of the different backgrounds we've seen.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I mean, you're talking about someone yourself who's looked at thousands and thousands of profiles, and the pathway. The exciting thing is that it's not linear. It's not as if you say, hey, in order to be in RevOps, you've got to start at this point and begin making these progressions to get to this place.
Yeah.
You've seen them, we've seen them come from just a variety of different backgrounds, and there's no cookie cutter form that's going to get you to where you feel like you need to go if you're looking for RevOps.
Right. So we've got a good mix of different pathways in, so functionally, but there is one thing that every one of these candidates have in common, and that is the intangible piece, the curiosity, the problem solver. They've seen something and they've wanted to change. They've wanted to drive change and make something better. And part of this functional background allows them also to have more empathy for people they're going to be supporting in an operational function.
That's a great point. I mean, you think about if I'm someone who's tasked with, if I'm on operations and let's say you're on sales, and I'm tasked with helping to enable and support your function, I can do that so much better if I know what it's like to sit in your chair. If I know what you're facing as a salesperson, now when I'm putting tools in place, when I'm helping develop out the processes, I know exactly what it's like to sit in your chair.
That's right.
Yeah, I love that empathy side of it.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about the company and the individual, but what does that transition look like? If we've seen so many folks come out of a background that's not an ops background, but out of some of these different go-to-market functions, what does that progression and that transition kind of look like?
Well, revenue operations is still on the rise.
Yeah.
So this true holistic role coming out and hiring, this leader who's looking end to end, that's still on the rare side. I think at a certain point there is an inflection point where companies start to realize we need to have somebody who's looking end to end.
Yeah.
But most of the time it's in some sort of a siloed structure that you find this individual. Maybe they are an SDR or BDR. Maybe they are sitting over, the financial analyst who's starting to partner with go-to-market.
Yeah.
Maybe they are up in marketing and they are they have the bent towards data and helping make sense of the mess.
Yeah.
And so it starts there in an ad hoc fashion.
Yeah. No, that makes
perfect
sense. Yeah. So, I mean, I know individuals, I've talked to, heck, I was one of those individuals, right? Where you're in a specifically sales function or marketing function or customers, it doesn't matter. but you're the person that's a little more bent towards this operation side. So you're the person that's looking at it and saying, hey, I can bring the reporting to our weekly meeting or our quarterly, our monthly meeting and really share what our data looks like. Or maybe you're the person that you're thinking, why do I have to keep doing the same thing over and over?
Frustrated.
There's got to be a way to automate this, right? And so even though my title isn't operations and my full-time job isn't that, I begin to dabble over in this operational side in various different ways. And I think the main thing with this is that those individuals tend to be explorers. They tend to be curious. They tend to be maybe a little more bent towards technology, automation, streamline, but they're usually doing that just completely ad hoc in their function.
That's right. It's almost like a light goes off. You're doing this job. You're having to, do this specific role that involves a lot of tools, that involves you having to manage your own process. And then you realize, wait a minute, this is taking way too long.
Yeah.
Wait a minute, we don't have true visibility. We could cut down time and, spend more time on the essential parts of this role.
Right.
In a sales role, for example.
Yeah.
So those types of scenarios start to show the potential for, hey, I can move into more of this type of role.
Yeah.
And it kind of builds from there.
And I think sometimes leaders begin to recognize that, right? And so let's talk about, so if we go from kind of an ad hoc operational role into maybe the next one, a true siloed operational role, how does that transition happen? When is it based on kind of the growth of the company? Is it based on the individual? What do you kind of see there?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of levers that that get pulled. As you're growing, one of the natural things a company does is start to invest in sales, and they start to add headcount there.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe they've hired their first sales leader, and that individual is starting to build out the team, or you've gone from just a founder-led sales motion to now you're starting to do outbound. You're wanting to build outbound.
Right.
Well, those individuals, now you've got maybe 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 salespeople that you've brought on, and you don't have any standardized process, and everybody's just running in one direction going, guys, I feel like we need to go this direction. I feel like we need to do these things and go do it.
Yeah.
And so now you've got, on many different fronts, you've got a total storm that's coming at you.
Sure.
Because over time, breaking those, if there is a process, breaking those processes, putting data into maybe their own systems.
Sure.
Maybe you don't have a CRM, right? It's just it's building up. It's a cluster of mess. And that's when you start to see this need for a dedicated person that can support, this group of individuals with standardization, with visibility, with, help in the CRM and the tech stack.
Yeah. So I hear you saying, the team, you're at a point where the team begins to grow.
Yep.
There isn't a lot of standardization yet. The team's growing, and there's this need to say, hey, we've got to begin to unify and standardize things. And I think a good leader would also look at their team and say, hey, there's a bright spot right there. There's something that's going really, really well. How can we take what Bob is doing or what Sue is doing that's winning, that's performing well, and standardize and operationalize it for the entire sales team or the marketing team or the customer, whatever team, right? Leaders begin to see things that are bright spots, and they say, okay, we want to operationalize that. And usually it's at a point where, and I don't think there's a prescriptive size of the team, but it's at a point where now there's enough of a need for someone to dedicate their entire time to the operational side of that particular team.
That's right. I think when I think about this, how do you find out what works and what doesn't? You have to slow down. You have to do exactly what you just said. You look at what are our people, what are our top performers doing? How are we, okay, we sold this big deal. We're winning. How are we winning? What are those ingredients? What are we doing right? What's not working? And so that's where operations comes in, right? You start to slow down and you look at some of those things, and you follow someone closely, and you pick out all the good, you look at the bad, right? And that's its own separate role, right? That starts to form.
Yeah. And so you've got these now kind of siloed. And the reason I say siloed is oftentimes it starts with, let's say, the sales team. You've got 6 or 8 folks on the team. One of those individuals is doing more ad hoc. The sales leader says, hey, can you do this more operational role? But marketing might not even know that person is in that function, right? Customer success might have no idea. So it's kind of siloed to just sales at this point. So a sales ops role amongst a sales team. Mm-hmm. But then at some point, there's the next progression, right? There's the movement from being siloed into a true RevOps, a true holistic approach. So what does that progression kind of look like?
Yeah, I think when you start to move towards growth, there's certain things that have to be looked at, right? We've got ICP, things start to get segmented. Once you start to have that go-to-market strategy playbook you're trying to roll out, you're looking at how can we really get this thing pointed in the right direction.
Sure.
With the key ingredients, right? Identifying ICP, looking at our systems, looking at our processes, sales process. But really what you're talking about of going holistic is we're looking all the way from the top, all the way through the bottom,
Sure.
right? We're looking at the entire funnel. We're not just looking at what is our pipeline doing, but we're looking at the entire lead journey.
Yeah.
And so that's when you start to see this holistic leader enter in. It'd be great if a early stage company could bring in someone like this right out of the gate, but it's on the rare side. We don't see that very often.
Yeah.
But that's really when we start to see this, hey, we need to optimize end to end, and we need to start to build a system that spans the entire funnel.
Yeah, instead of just looking at sales, my own little world that I live in, but how do I reach back into marketing and ensure that we understand what the customer journey looks like, the experience from marketing into sales? How do I ensure that it looks the way it's supposed to look as it moves into customer success beyond that? Yeah, and looking holistically at that. And that's usually, that first one is usually one person, right? It's an individual contributor, it's one person. But then you go to the next step where you're saying, okay, now probably that last progression is a full RevOps team. And so what does kind of the structure of that look like? How do you see that forming out?
Yeah, it's interesting. So it starts very specialized, it seems like, the evolution of the role, and kind of based on limited knowledge of whatever C-suite, right? Because a lot of the leaders tend to inform this role as well as you have people in some sort of operational fashion championing this role. Sure. So it's top to bottom that's influencing this drive towards a more centralized team. But it really goes from specialized, right? And then this evolution happens, and we go to holistic, and then it starts to specialize under a leader again. Yeah. And so you start to see all these disciplines start to have separate tactical roles under a RevOps function. And that's, I mean, we've seen that in more mature businesses, right? Yeah. Larger companies where you start to have, a systems department. You start to have, analytics, project management, enablement. Right? All of these different departments that then grow with the company as the requests and needs and, everything else scales up too.
Yeah. So I hear you saying initially ad hoc specialists working within the sales team or the marketing team or whatever team they're on, then that grows into a more siloed generalist who's doing tech and data and everything but siloed to their particular department. Then holistic individual contributor looking cross-functionally. And then finally a team of which you're led by like a strategist who's really at the top looking at the strategy cross-functionally but deploying different specialists underneath them would be kind of that progression.
That's right.
Got it. That makes sense.
And there's some nuances. There's some things that are not set in stone there.
Of course, yeah.
We've even seen it, siloed operational leaders that work well and are still aligned, right? As opposed to having a fully separate revenue operations department with every functional operations leader rolling into that RevOps leader. So there's different ways to do it. It really depends on what's the DNA of the company. What is the what is the top really wanting, and the capacity, right, to move in this direction.
And how you got there in a journey,
And
right?
how
You may
there.
have somebody who's functioning really well in a particular role because they naturally got there, and you don't want to just say, well, hey, we're going to mix up the whole thing and totally throw this off balance, right? And it's that natural progression. So let's transition a little bit and let's talk about, is there, of these different siloed ops roles that we've talked about, is there one that you have seen kind of has an advantage over others in its progression up through and to RevOps?
Yeah. So that would be sales ops. To answer your question really quickly here, sales ops is most of the leaders that end up going to revenue operations. A big lion's share is going to be coming out of sales ops.
Okay. Yeah.
We do see individuals come out of marketing ops. We do see individuals come out of CS and make that transition. But a lot of individuals, and it has to do with come out of sales ops because a lot of it has to do with, again, those initial growing pains of a company. Where are you going to spend most of your time? It's on that middle stage of the funnel early on. Yeah. Right? It's outbound. It's pipeline. We need pipeline visibility. We need someone to tell us what's going on right there.
Right.
And so sales operations.
Yeah. And I think, the sales function, if you think about marketing, sales, customer success, finance, all the different functions of a business, the sales one is the one that's closest to revenue generation, creation. Yeah. Doesn't mean it's the most important, right? Yeah. Everyone knows it. I've got to have marketing in order to have some leads to work for sales.
Right.
And especially in B2B SaaS, the space that we do a lot of work in, if you don't have strong customer engagement, if you don't have strong customer success, it's not going to turn into reoccurring revenue. It's not going to, you're not going to have the renewals. You're going to have high churn. Yep. So obviously all those tie back to revenue as well.
Absolutely.
But when we just think about the different functions, the one kind of closest to revenue generation is sales. And so oftentimes we see that that's the one that has the first step into this RevOps function.
That's right.
If someone is not in a sales ops role, but they're in a marketing ops role or one of these other ones, should they see that as a limiter, something that's going to hold them? Is it impossible to see a path into RevOps?
It's not impossible. Again, your success in revenue operations is directly tied to what you've touched, what type of an impact you've made, how much exposure you've had cross-functionally. So if you're in the marketing operations lane, get more involved in sales.
Yeah.
Take that initiative. Work closely together with sales. And so that's what we see a lot of times is these leaders, or individual contributors, that they start to solve problems in different departments, and that sort of builds that holistic skill set.
Yeah.
So if you're in one of those other functions, get involved in the pipeline.
Yeah.
Right? Get involved in the sales process.
Sure.
Look beyond just the top of funnel. Same thing with CS. Work closely with sales.
Yeah. I mean, I think as I think about the candidates that we talk to and we hear them unpack their journey, oftentimes they're the person that's raising their hand saying, yeah, I'll be happy to help there. Yeah, I think there's something I can add there, right? They're curious, they're exploring, they're looking to take on new opportunities, solve problems that maybe others aren't ready to solve right now. And all of that's going to give them exposure to the different cross-functional roles that they're going to need as they move into RevOps.
And we've had people, we've had C-level leaders tell us this. We've had consulting firms tell us this. We want individuals that have seen many different parts of the revenue engine.
That's right.
The more you can see, the more you can influence, and the more ultimately your holistic skill set is going to be rounded out.
Yeah, for sure. So really kind of, David, as we wrap things up here, I think kind of the bottom line is that there's no singular path into RevOps. There's a lot of different ways that we can get at this. So let's kind of summarize, if I'm a hiring manager, what do I take away from this?
Yeah. I think, ultimately look at the intangibles. Look at the soft side of the skill set. If you're hiring junior,
right.
I think it's really important. I mean, we've heard stories. I've heard stories of candidates that have had very little experience.
Sure.
That ended up taking initiative, landing a role, starting to make an impact, and just solving problems to build the role for themselves. And then they ended up in this path.
Right.
So don't limit yourself there. If you're going junior, look at this innate competitive nature, this problem solver.
Yeah.
You have to be obsessed with solving problems.
Sure.
You have to be curious and drive that forward. But also look at, some of these other skill sets within the operational silos. What are you seeing? What are your needs?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
I think that's great. And I would say to a candidate, if you're not yet in that role, but you're looking to be there, the main thing is look for growth opportunities. Look for places to get involved, not only in your silo or where you're involved now, but cross-functionally. Learn about sales if you're in marketing. Learn about customer success if you're in sales. Learn about the other parts of the other functions of the business, because all that experience is going to serve you well as you move into a more holistic RevOps function down the road.
That's right. And to round that out a little bit more, we in the last episode we talked about those pre-hiring parts.
Yeah.
I think that plays into this.
Sure.
Sitting down as leaders and defining what are our true needs, what are we looking to get out of this potential role, what are our biggest pain points, and that informs exactly what type of skill set you're going to be targeting within this. But you said it right.
Yeah.
Cross-functional.
That's it.
The more exposure, the better.
Yeah.
And that will make you more effective as an operator.
Yeah, for sure. Well, David, man, I think this was great. You unpacked kind of that pathway to RevOps. Obviously, it's non-linear. There's a lot of different ways, but hopefully we added some value to some folks out there. So thanks so much for all your thoughts.
That's right. Don't shy away. You can get into this function.
That's right.
You just need to get the exposure.
That's it.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
Yep, we enjoyed it.
Great.
And again, RevOps Recruiter Podcast.
That's right. Follow us, subscribe, check back in. We're gonna be here next week.
We'll be here. All right, David. Thanks, man.